Good morning. I'm Holly Magnuson, and this is Ask the Security Guy with Shawn Kohrman. Today, we're going to be talking about the email that most, if not all, LastPass users received earlier in June. Going to talk about what that meant and what the implications of that is. But first, a couple of housekeeping things. If you have any questions during the broadcast, go ahead and use the Q&A app and ask those questions, and we'll get to them. And then the second thing is we would like to wish our very own IMT employee, Frank Corlett, a very happy birthday. So with that, Shawn, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. Everything's rolling away.
So yeah, the LastPass breach came out and the media grabbed hold of it and turned it into this big thing. And it was interesting because LastPass as a company in other interviews indicated that they were a little surprised at how quickly the media picked up and ran with it. But all that said, it is a thing. And LastPass as a company was extremely transparent about the whole process, about what happened, what they're doing, what may have been exposed. So, and that may is a big part of this. There is no confirmation that any data was actually lost. However, LastPass is taking a very high road, and they're saying, we're going to be ultra paranoid, and we're going to assume that since we saw data transfers of a certain size that theoretically could match this subset of data, that this data may have been exposed. But again, there is no confirmation that any data was actually exfiltrated from their organization. So in other interviews I've heard and read, there is speculation that the anomalous traffic they refer to may have been nothing more than a piece of spyware on an employee's computer.
Very interesting.
Which, when you think about it, even for a security company like LastPass, once again, what we're talking about is the weakest link is us, the human factor. So their technological controls are amazing and very, very well designed. And not only that, they're completely transparent about how they've built their systems, which is rare for an organization to do. Furthermore, they've been very transparent about the breach and about what happened, what's going on, what's lost, what they think was lost, why they think it was lost. And all of this information is available on their blog, on their website. Now, I'm a LastPass user ×2. I have a personal account, and then here at APU, we have an enterprise version as well that we use within IMT. And so I got emails for both. But because I use multi-factor authentication, I was not required to change my password.
Do you want to go ahead and explain how multi-factor verification works with LastPass?
Sure. In fact, before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about authentication as a thing. So authentication is how we grant a person access to a thing, to a server, to whatever. And usually we require proof. So it's a username and a password. It's a username and a YubiKey or a Google Authenticator or something like that. Or it's a fingerprint, a voice print, a retinal scan. Embedded or ingested technology, which is becoming a thing now, where people are putting little bits of something under their skin, or they're swallowing something. That is, I guess the simplest way to think about it would be like a little radio beacon inside you.
No, thank you.
That identifies you uniquely. Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah. So when we talk about authentication in my world, we go with the principles of something you know, which is a password or passphrase. Something you have, which would be like Google Authenticator or a YubiKey or RSA Secure ID, little thing that generates a number on it. And for those of you who have worked in military or government contracting organizations, you'll be familiar with those. And then biometrics, which tends to really freak people out. And that's where we're talking about fingerprints and retinal scans and those kinds of things. So to delve into that a little bit, I don't want to go too far into biometrics. Biometrics for, say, fingerprint scanning can operate in a couple ways. One, they can take an actual scan of your fingerprint and store an image, which is how some of the older ones worked. The more common way, and in fact, this is the way the new iPhone works, is when you swipe your finger across the fingerprint scanner, what it does is it collects data points. It doesn't actually memorize your fingerprint, it memorizes data points about your fingerprint. So the data it stores isn't your fingerprint. And it really, I won't say it can't be used, but it'd be really difficult to use it anywhere else because you can't reconstruct a fingerprint from the data points that they're collecting.
Very interesting.
And
Is it the
then
same way with the Galaxy technology for like Samsung, the Galaxy S5 or 6 or any of those?
the Samsung Galaxy uses a slightly different technology because the difference between the two companies, but the principles are relatively the same. Where they're collecting data points and not the actual fingerprint. But retinal scanners work by analyzing the pattern of blood vessels in the back of your eye. Some of the embedded or ingested technologies, that is a creepy world, and I really don't want to go there. But voice prints do operate off your voice. And you can, I'm sure, as you hear these, you can think of different ways they could be spoofed. Different ways that they can be replicated. And that's the problem is, not only do we have the secure storage of this data to consider, because in cases of when we're storing personal data like that, your biometric information, depending on how it's collected, it could be uniquely you. Now, a passphrase or a password, I can reset. A YubiKey or a secure ID, I can get a new one. I can't get a new fingerprint. And I'm certainly not willing to get a new eyeball.
No.
So it's the same when we talk about protecting personal health information for those of us who deal with HIPAA and the medical records that are stored by doctors' offices and insurance companies and all those things. That type of data is extremely sensitive because there is no way to reset it. It doesn't change. It is uniquely you. It is data about you. So authentication, and that is the gatekeeper for a lot of this stuff, especially as we move into a world where cloud services are such a thing. Your username and your passphrase are the gatekeepers for a lot of things now. So having a good, strong passphrase is imperative. And using a password manager like LastPass enables us to have a unique username and passphrase for every entity that we work with, so that if somebody does get a hold of one, they're not getting a hold of everything. Now, LastPass made a few really good points. When you sign up for LastPass, one of the things we preach in security awareness classes all the time, Holly, is never use the same passphrase, especially for LastPass. But
very uniquely, for that, nothing else. I mean,
yeah. So we say have a unique password for your email, for your personal email account, have a unique password for LastPass, right?
Yep.
So what LastPass is worried about is for people that haven't followed that advice and are using that passphrase in other sites. They're not worried about it because they think that their stuff can get compromised. There are so many layers of encryption and hashing going on with the way LastPass stores their data. There's a couple things to point out. If this data actually did get out in the wild and is in the hands of somebody, there is no way to do a bulk attack against that list. Somebody would have to go one by one, and that's due to the way LastPass constructed and architected their service. So there just is no way. It is impossible. Secondly, to even get at the passphrase, would require so much horsepower from a technological standpoint. It's just not feasible. It really isn't. It's possible theoretically, but it's really not feasible.
Yeah, that's one of the things we do talk a lot about on the passphrase is current computing power. So it likewise with LastPass, it sounds like even if they have information, what it would take, they're going to move on to the guy who's using password 123.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, theoretically, if they have, so if the attacker has that information that LastPass is concerned that was lost, email address, encrypted version of the password, and the salt. So the salt is something you add to the mix to randomize everything. And the way LastPass works is there's a unique salt per person. So that even that little bit of randomization that's thrown into the mix to make this big long piece of gibberish that's actually stored on their servers, good luck. Now, the way it would work is if the person has a very weak password or passphrase, one that's well known and out there on one of the lists, and they have the salt from LastPass's servers, and they have the personal email address that it was actually used for that account, because not everybody uses their personal email address for LastPass. Most people do, but not everyone does. So there's a whole lot of variables involved in even getting at this point. Now, to set the stage a little higher, what LastPass did in response is, if someone tries to log into your LastPass account from an IP address they've never seen before, they're going to force a change.
Yeah, well, actually, what they do, because I had this happen to me Sunday. I wanted to use LastPass on the church's computer, and because I'd never installed the extension there, it sent me an email to my account that I had to verify that was really me. And that
exactly.
So yeah, it worked very well. I've actually had it happen twice since this came out, and because I happened to use LastPass in a location I hadn't prior.
Now, if you aren't protecting your personal email account properly, that's a concern. And one of the IMT members here brought up a really good point. If you don't protect your phone with a passphrase, because your phone typically has your personal email account on it. For most people with smartphones, that's the first thing they hook up with is their personal email account to their phone. So theoretically, if I had your phone and I had your email address and I tried to log into your LastPass and I knew a bunch of other stuff about you, I could go through that verification process. But it would have to be one by one. There's no way to do it in bulk. So what LastPass is recommending is, and they're forcing it for people who don't use multi-factor authentication. But for those of us, so let's say for instance that you don't use multi-factor authentication, and that's an option that's part of LastPass. They will force you to change your password, just carte blanche, and that is purely precautionary. It's not because they're worried, it's because it's just a good idea to do it in a case like this. For those of us that do use multi-factor authentication, like myself, that's not a thing. Now, will I change my passwords? Yeah, I probably will, but I haven't done it yet. And I don't see a need.
Yeah, I went ahead and changed mine just because, it was time, to change it. We do have a couple of questions.
Sure.
One of them, going back to the fingerprint scanner, the fingerprint, can you kind of explain a little bit more about what do you mean when it stores data points?
So when it scans your fingerprint, it's looking at the peaks and valleys, right, that make up a fingerprint. And it takes, what it will do is it'll say, okay, at quadrant X, and Y, there's this amount of deviance or variance, and it will record that little bit. Now it'll do that a few hundred or a few thousand times over an area of your fingerprint. And then all of those data points are then stored as numbers. That goes
Okay,
through an
I
algorithm.
think that helps, hopefully.
Yeah. So it's numeric data that's stored
But
based
it's
on an algorithm.
okay. The other question, not really related to passwords, and he actually hasn't asked it yet. He has a question about encrypted laptops. So,
Okay.
hopefully he will, when he hears this, he'll go ahead and pop that question in, so we can kind of answer that, because I know encryption is another thing that people are, interested in.
Okay. So what's the question?
Well, he just said he has a question about encryption. And so hopefully, like I said, when we get to that point and he hears us talking about it, he will go ahead and pop that question in.
Okay.
So you still are a big fan. You still promote the use of LastPass, regardless of how the media has made this run about this possible data breach.
Well, and I don't want to bang on the media too much, but they've turned this into something it didn't need to be, and to something it's not. I mean, we've got so many other major data breaches that are very real, and there's verifiable data loss. I mean, this is, and we're still in the dark about a lot of those data breaches as to what was lost, how it was lost, et cetera, et cetera. But here we've got a security company that went out there and was completely transparent with the community. Here's what we know. Here's what we don't. Here's what we're doing to stop it. And here are the preventative measures we're taking, and here's the preventative measures we recommend. So do I have any concerns about LastPass? No. If anything, my confidence in them as an organization is strengthened because of the way they conducted themselves in this.
Right. I mean, as soon as they saw something, they let all of us know. They,
Yes.
giving, this is how, to remind us how we should take care of our passwords and stuff. And so, no, I'm, like I said, had been a Dashlane user pretty much since Dashlane came out. But LastPass gives me a couple of things that Dashlane does not, and I've made the switch.
Yeah.
And I will say, comparing the two, if you're thinking about using a password manager, LastPass to me is a little clunkier. And it's enough different from Dashlane that it took me a couple of weeks to figure out some of its idiosyncrasies, but now I'm loving it, especially being able to, because one of the big drawbacks for me with Dashlane is, for me to use Dashlane, I have to install it in the computer that I'm using. And so with LastPass, I don't have to do that. I can go into Sakioka Training Room and install the extension and be able to use my password manager. And then when the computer reboots, it's all gone off the computer, and I've been able to do what I needed to do in the class.
Exactly. So, I mean, as we move forward, I mean, one of the things I often point out to people with any organization on the planet, it's not a matter of when or if they're going to be breached, it's just a matter of when. So what we're looking for is a strong response, a good response, and good practices on their inside to mitigate any damage of a breach in the first place. And with LastPass, we saw that they have excellent controls that not only limited significantly any potential impact, but their response to the community couldn't have been better.
It is very true. Okay, so those questions have started coming in from on this one, talking about the encryption. If my laptop is stolen, it is encrypted, is the data on the laptop protected?
Short answer, yes. So if you have a strong username and password that's not guessable, no one's going to be able to get access to the data on that drive. Now, for Mac users, it's a little different because we need to make sure there that you have a good username and password on the box, that you haven't shortened it or made it something weak. But for all laptop users, Mac or Windows, that have the encryption technology that is our standard, there is no way to boot up and get access to the drive short of being the NSA.
Oh yeah, because this user, he works with a lot of institutional data,
Hmm.
and he's concerned about having that institutional data on his laptop. And I would first off say thank you for thinking about that and being concerned.
Ideally, we don't want that data ever stored on a laptop. That's why we have the file server, which we have a different set of controls around. But in the case that there is data on the machine and it is encrypted, it's safe.
And his third question, let me read. Since we are talking about using Google Drive to replace our servers, I would be storing all of my data on my laptop to be synchronized with my Google Drive.
Hmm. So that's something we're still looking at and working through the process of figuring out what's the best security controls around that type of use case. It's not fully decided on how we're going to implement that or if, but we are looking into it very actively right now.
And what types of files do you recommend that we do not store on Google Drive?
So for right now, we want to avoid storing anything with, well, we should never be storing any credit card information, period. That's policy. The other type of data that we want to be extremely cautious with is what we call personally identifiable information, PII or P2 data. And that is combinations of data that you can uniquely identify a person. So the most common example of that is a name and a social security number, or a name and a driver's license number, or a name, address, and phone number. So a lot of people think that P2 data is just a social security number. It's actually more than that. It is enough data to uniquely identify a person. So if you have a name and a city, that's one thing, because now how many people with that same name could reside in that city? It could be a lot. Narrow it down to, I don't know, a town, a small town, then your likelihood of getting a unique individual gets better. Get a street address, and you're pretty much down to a person, unless there's two people by the same name living at that house. So, but it's those degrees that you have to be thoughtful about.
And he just followed up with, so we're waiting for a green light before we make that leap. And I'm assuming he's talking about putting, moving all of our file servers to Google Drive.
Right, right. So once we have a decision on that, we'll be working with the community on how to roll that out.
And when I was, when we were at Google a couple of weeks ago, that was a topic of conversation. And one company, Netflix, had made that leap where they moved off of the traditional file servers to Google Drive. And it was not an easy transition.
Yeah.
In fact, they were having a lot of struggles, and they were getting ready to do their business office and legal last. They kind of phased it in and stuff. And we've had some departments here on campus who have pretty much moved all of their items from their department shares to Google Drive.
Right, right. And we do have some there are a number of departments here that are working on pilots or doing it already. But they're already seeing some of the challenges from a functional standpoint that I'm sure Netflix has run into as well.
Yeah, she was very vocal in wishing that we would have had this conversation, because they actually brought in a gentleman from a company called Better Cloud to talk about why Google does not want Google Drive as a replacement for file servers. Was not the intention. And it was a very interesting conversation, because a lot of companies are like we're looking at that as a possible solution.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Well, there's an economy of scale there. So Holly, you had as we get close to time here, you had sent me a quote that I wanted to share with our audience that I just really enjoyed. From Benjamin Franklin: "Distrust and caution are the parents of security." So a little distrust and a lot of caution go a long way.
Yeah, when I saw that quote come up, I can't even remember now where I found it. But this is Benjamin Franklin 250 years ago, And it applies today.
It does. It does. Because it's principle based. It's not technology based. And that's with security, that's what we deal with a lot, is really the application of principles in whatever environment we're in. So it's not just about the tech.
No, because sometimes they go low tech with their scams and the different things they try.
Oh yeah. Well, and I was sharing with somebody recently, dumpster diving is actually a part of hacking, because you can get an amazing amount of information about a company in their trash. Now, is it disgusting work? Yes. But the data's there. You'd be amazed what people throw out in the form of printouts.
Yeah, and that was something that, when I used to, that was my job of doing all the printouts, that, there were certain documents that went into a locked box, and only the people with the key could get those documents out.
Yep.
And, we had boxes that we made sure got shredded. I will answer the current question. No, Better Cloud, I don't think we're looking at it at all. They just happen to be the sponsor of our Google Meetup that Dante and I were part of, and James Jansen. They bought our lunch, they bought our breakfast, and they spoke. But that was just how I came in contact with them.
Okay.
Well, we got a thank you from Chris Olson. A lot of these questions did come from Chris Olson from Institutional Research. So he had some
Chris.
really
Excellent questions.
Yeah. And I like the way he's thinking.
Absolutely. It's a little distrust and a lot of caution.
Yes. And speaking of a little, caution and a lot of distrust, if you're a baseball fan, which I know Shawn is really not into sports at all, you may have heard in the news. If you Google Cardinals, hack Astros on Google, I think I got 118 hits on that story. And if you're following it, there's a lot of he said, she said type things in it. But one thing that was, that kind of stuck out to me, because there's some questions that the guy who left the Cardinals and went to work for the Astros, he uses the same password for everything. And some of the thinking is that people in the Cardinals organization knew what passwords he usually used, and that's how they got into the Astros database. No. FBI is investigating all of this, but what jumped out to me is the importance of not using the same password for everything.
Yeah.
Getting that password manager so that you can have these totally random passwords. And then the other thing that jumped out at me as well is changing the passwords of role accounts. Like for me, I have an account training at apu.edu. When my student worker that worked for me for 4 years, when she left in December, the first thing I did, right after the day she quit, was change the password. We are seeing from time to time our role accounts being compromised. We need to, anytime there's a personnel change, just be in the habit of changing that password. And you don't have to go through the support desk anymore to change the role account. And if you go to support.apu.edu, there's an article there that will tell you how you can change the role account password.
Outstanding stuff.
So that was my 2 cents for the day.
Great. Well, do we have any other questions?
No other questions have popped up. And so I think with that, it's almost 11:30. So
okay.
We will see you guys next month. As far as we know, we'll at least do Ask the Security Guy in August. We'll see what happens with our other Hangouts. But next Thursday, July the 9th, we will be having Hangout with IMT. And our tech time is going to be with Ray Martin from our Enterprise Applications Group. And he's going to be talking about some PeopleSoft stuff. So I'm excited about that.
Nice.
Anything else, Shawn?
That's all I had for today.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you, everyone.